To give it a little bit of a background about Campari, September 2019, we outsourced first generation outsource for Campari. And we outsourced all of our core towers, end user application infrastructure to a single vendor. And we had a single function, my organization, then managing those services. However, this was September 2019. We all know what happened February 2020 with COVID. And then actually November 2020, we were also hit with quite a significant malware attack. So then really 2021, we were focused on rebuilding. So we didn't really get back to normal and focused on services until 2022. So we'll start talking about that period. Now, remembering that all of our services were outsourced to a single vendor, we were working specifically with them around experience. HappySignals was implemented at the very beginning of the contract back in 2019 and has been gathering data since that point. And we were focused initially just in the service experience area. So incidents, service requests, all focused with the end user standard implementation at that time. So we were doing a lot of ticket scrubbing and auditing of tickets on a continual basis with monthly reviews, action plans, all of the usual standard approaches. And we were focusing on, as you can see over here, let me put my pointer on. Over here. So we were looking at the negative factors. User wasn't informed, the issue wasn't solved, or the service was slow. And we were relating those back to areas that would drive that negative factor from the user. We weren't providing ticket updates, or they weren't very clear. Maybe in the resolution notes, we weren't detailing what we did. So when we're asking the user in the resolved notification, this is your issue, this is what we did. If it's fixed, click on a number to give us experience or reopen. Maybe the user couldn't actually determine if it was solved or not. The resolution note said, I fixed it. So not very helpful. We also were focusing on something called the 3-strike rule. So the process that we use to keep on top of tickets when the issue is resolved, but the user isn't confirming or coming back to us. And so we close them out. I'll come back to the MTTR one in a moment. We were also doing quite a bit of understanding and adoption activity, because what we'd started to realize as well is that in a fair number of cases, users would give us negative feedback actually because they didn't understand the service or the technology that they were trying to use. And that was driving negative sentiment. And we also were seeing, as we all do, revenge feedback, as the HappySignals guys talk about it, the scores of 0, 1 or 2, maybe with the highest productivity loss. And so essentially the way that we'd set this up, we would have daily checks for revenge feedback, and people would then contact the users, understand why they were so unhappy and what we could do about it. We would be looking for understanding and adoption areas, and then maybe locally driving training activity, understanding, etc. And then we were looking at, for the top 3, ticket updates, resolution notes, 3-strike rule, focusing on ITSM process adherence, and also maybe fine-tuning of ITSM processes, even tooling, putting in templates for communications and these kind of things. Those had some benefit. You can see the trending score during 2022, 2023 going up quite well. And we've done some significant events through that year as well. May 2022, we did a S4 migration. We were previously on SAP ECC, and at the same time, we did a complete finance business process transformation as well. So a major global program impacting, obviously, IT services as users are getting support through that. So that was happening at the same time. Where we had some good success and quite simply done as well, to be honest. We're not a big organization. There's only a few of us that were focusing on this with our core vendor at the time, was actually with MTTR. And so we were then looking at the elapsed time for every single P3 or P4 incident every month. And we were then understanding which ones of what was the average. Our SLA, for example, is 2 or 3 days respectively, business days, obviously. And we were understanding how many, what the average was for all of them. We were understanding what the average was for all of those that also claimed to comply with SLA, and also what was the average for all of those that were showing as outside of SLA. And then we could actually understand overall how things were performing, but we could also see what were the areas that were dragging down the MTTR and whether those were within the SLA, so recorded as still being an SLA success, or whether they were an SLA miss. And that really moved things quite considerably, and quite a good degree of focus that have then seen our perceived productivity loss within the user base drop down well. We've still got some way to go, but it's a lot closer now to the SLA. So that's very good from our perspective, especially because the business is now actually starting to show that as well through their perceived productivity loss. September 2022, though, we implemented the new proactive surveys that had become available initially, and still were focused around office environments, laptops and computers. And you can see at the bottom how we were running on those from September 22 to the end of last year. And again, we're showing some positive trend. And this one is an interesting one as well, because we didn't know all of the issues that were ongoing in the environment at the time. And actually, the experience data from the business helped us to understand that. And when we looked at the negative factors in here, we could see meeting room equipment that wasn't working, or the network wasn't reliable, or their PC was slow, etc. And that's driven us to make a few changes, and we've done quite a lot of work just within that technology during 22 and 23, which is now starting to show that improvement. And what is really quite interesting, because for the proactive surveys, we ask all users twice a year. They will receive the survey at a random time, depending on when they're doing other surveys as well, all managed within ServiceNow and the HappySignals plugin. But we can also see the time, the length of service of the people giving us feedback, and we can already see the people that have been with us the shortest are scoring the highest. So people with that memory of last year, my PC was terrible, they're still maybe thinking in that kind of mindset, whereas someone that's new in with the new PC, with better capability, with having refreshed all of the meeting rooms across all of the sites, etc., are scoring much more highly than other people. So that's been quite successful, and whilst it's driven both of those areas, have driven quite a bit of work for us internally and with our core vendor, it's not been too onerous or difficult to actually achieve. However, we're now at the beginning of 2024, and through 2023, whilst doing all of this work, the IT function within Campari was also working on its evolution and what the future modern approach for IT would look like within Campari. And we're now well into that journey and progressing, and we are now using other core vendors as well as our main outsourced provider for core services. We now have an SAP platform. Campari is pretty much an end-to-end SAP house, single SAP S4 instance. So there's lots of projects, lots of maintenance activities in SAP, and we use a specific vendor for that activity. We have platforms also coming online with Modern Workplace, M365, with integration and Power Application areas. So there are more teams now starting to handle both deployment project activity and service, whereas before It was always one single function. And we now have more vendors involved in that service environment as well. So as part of this this move and this change and this restructure, and Campari continues to grow, it's no secret our business growth is 50% acquisition. We're always buying something. We've always got new users to onboard and new sites, etc. We also had to think about how we as a function manage the business as well. And so as we then look to transform this year, then there's some core areas that we're approaching. So firstly, if we think about the IT organizations within the markets, we in the center need to be able to help and support them so that they can actually manage the relationship with the business. Rather than it being people in the center trying to have a conversation with people in the markets, it's much easier if local IT already in the market can understand what is happening with all of the various services through ticket volumes, escalations, through changes in technology, etc. So they are much better able to have that discussion with the business. That will lead into also moving away from very firmly conversations around SLAs or anything like that with the business, and a much more experience-oriented conversation. We want to, and as you've heard from Neil as well, we already have DEX tools in our environment. We are, as an organization, we like to be in control of the technology. We don't like to be told necessarily. So therefore, we have very strong capabilities within our teams in the various technology areas that understand what good looks like and where we want to be going. So therefore, we've had tooling capabilities being developed and being introduced over the last year or so. Up here, you can see Zscaler giving us experience around the internet or network connectivity for users. This is HP Proactive Insights for PCs. We also use Intune Analytics. And this is actually just some ServiceNow dashboarding. Now, ultimately, in these 2 bullet points here, where we're trying to drive this is we can use, so we want to implement the framework exactly as Neil has been talking with, and we are working with Brighthorse. We want to understand what the technology is actually telling us. We want to understand the service side of it. ServiceNow gives us all of that. But we also will continue, obviously, to then use the HappySignals sentiment data as well. Maybe even more reliant on the proactive surveys than the service experience data as ticket volumes reduce and as we see automation and less opportunity for users perhaps to give feedback through service experience feedback and more through the proactive actual surveys as well. We also want to get to the point where, to as much degree as possible, given that all of our core services are delivered by central teams, we still want the local IT teams to be able to understand how PCs are working. So when a user gives a 0 score on their PC in a given market, the local IT team will see that, they'll be able to react to it. They can also look at the tooling and understand actually what is happening with that person's PC before then going to talk to them. So then the conversation is, I can see you've given me some negative feedback here. I can understand why. This is actually what we're going to do about it. It might be that user might be asked to reboot their PC more than once every 3 weeks. Or it could be, actually, yes, there is an issue here and we'll get this addressed, for example. We also then want to ensure, and this is then where the experience framework comes into it as well, that as we understand from the markets those core drivers around how the business are perceiving the escalations that we get from them, that they're bringing that feedback into then the central team that owns that given service, and that we have one single service improvement plan for that service globally, being owned and driven by the service owner for that area, but it includes the improvement actions not only for them and anything they want to address with their vendor or with the technology, but also as far as the markets are concerned. So then not only is that service moving forward globally, but also the guys in the markets who are the ones that stand in front of the business are able to have that conversation around, these are all of the areas, these are all of the issues that we can see, and this is what we're doing, and this is the plan, and this is how we're progressing. The final thing I would probably say as well, and then just to come back to this data at the bottom, if you remember what I was saying at the beginning, we were doing a lot of ticket scrubbing. We were looking at ticket updates. We were looking at elapsed time and things like that. We still very much need to do that. And that is what is telling us how well the experience is on the service side, but also how well are our core vendors actually adhering to our ITSM processes. So we've also been doing some work at the same time for how we could dashboard that so that we can, as much as possible, at least remove the ticket scrubbing to find these areas, use the dashboarding, performance analytics, for example, in ServiceNow, and these kind of capabilities to point us in the right direction. So then all of the service owners across all of the global areas can utilize that dashboarding, and it's easier for them to have then the discussion and the conversation with the vendors around process adherence, why ticket updates are slow in a given area, or maybe P4 incidents on a given service have a very long MTTR, but we're still hitting the SLA of 3 days or whatever. So that's how we're trying to drive it forward as we become then a more modern IT organization with more teams taking on service responsibility, but actually then driving the improvement, the direction, the delivery, not only from a contractual perspective for the vendors, but actually for the local businesses. It's driven around their experience of using that service and how we can keep that moving forward and improving. We want to start this year, as you can see in these initial focus areas, very much in what we call our foundation areas. Hopefully, perhaps in 2025, we would then be looking at maybe starting to introduce this as well across the SAP platform, for example, which handles a very high proportion of the ticket volumes for the business.